We're going to be in John chapter 2 this morning. John chapter 2. Some of you are saying, yay, we got out of chapter 1. I think we're only going to spend 2 weeks in chapter 2, if you can believe it. What's incredible about chapter 2 of John's Gospel is this little paragraph I read in one of the commentaries. It said, whoever understands the significance of both the stories in chapter 2, the water into wine and the cleansing of the temple, then you have the key to the ministry, the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. You have the key to understanding God's kingdom and the church. Wow, that's a pretty bold statement to say about one chapter in God's Word. And so we're going to be looking at these two stories, these two accounts from Jesus' life. In the beginning of chapter 2, when we see Jesus turning the water into wine, what we see is the very first sign, the very first display of God's power and glory. Jesus takes something very ordinary, water, and yet it was sacred, it was ceremonial water, and He turns it into something else very ordinary. Wine. Non-sacred. Secular. Two very ordinary things. One holy and sacred and the other non-holy or secular. And so we're going to look at that together. And right in between John 1 and John 3, John 1 and 3 are both very theological passages. And then we get these two stories right in the middle. And there's a really good reason for that. John 1, we looked at how the Word became flesh. Remember? And for the Greek mind, that just was boggling. The Word, the Logos, the Creator, the Infinite, became flesh, took on a body. In other words, God became a man. How could that be? And yet that's what John chapter 1 tells us all about. And then John chapter 3, the most famous verse in the Bible, for God so loved the world that He gave His only Son. And so there's that discourse with Nicodemus there. And then right in between these two, there's these stories from Jesus' life. And Jesus is kind of, with these two events that take place in His life, showing that God did become a man. The sacred, the holy, did come down to become an ordinary human being. And that's what these two stories are all about. That the living God of the universe took on a body, lived among us, ate breakfast, grew up with brothers and sisters, and swung a hammer. He was one of us. And now this Messiah, the Emmanuel, the God with us, takes some ceremonially clean water that had been set aside to purify people from the world and from the dust and from the uncleanness, and to make them holy again, to make them right, to make them pure. And Jesus takes that and He turns it into wine for guests at a party. So let's look at this together. I'll be reading John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. On the third day, now this is only the third day since the beginning of chapter 1. Jesus has got His disciples. They've just been with Him for a day and a half, and now it's the third day. A wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and His disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to Him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then He told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." This, the first of his miraculous signs, Jesus performed in Cana of Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. So let's look at this story together. So here's Jesus, his mother's there, his disciples are there, the whole town is there. This is a community party. Cana was a small village, it was a small place, and so everyone would have been invited in the Hebrew culture to come to this wedding. And we don't have weddings like this today in our culture. A wedding is an afternoon and an evening, and then everybody goes their own way. But not so in the little town of Cana. This was a 7-day party. This was an affair. I mean, everybody came that could come. And Jesus is there, and his mother's there, and his disciples are there. And they run out of wine. Now, the Americans just celebrated Thanksgiving. And it seems like that's a pretty big deal down there. I'm just kind of catching on to that. Thursday they had their Thanksgiving, and then Black Friday, and then now they've got the weekend, and I'm sure there's a lot of people having just a great party. Some of them are family and friends, and they're together, and others are just any excuse, football game or whatever, just to get out there and have some fun. There are a lot of Canadians painted green today to have some fun this afternoon in Calgary as Saskatchewan takes on the Montreal Alouettes. Do we have any Alouette fans here? No. Oh, we do have one. Oh, wow. I'm sorry. It's Ron. Yeah, Ron's not here. Yeah. What do we have in Canada that might be similar? Well, Christmas week. Christmas week, I think, might be similar. A lot of families get together and they invite friends, and there's you're with the family, you're with the friends, and it's a celebration for that whole time. But that's what this wedding was like in Cana. And they ran out of wine, an apparent disaster. No more wine. Now, if that happened today, well, we'd go out and we'd get a few more bottles of wine and no problem. Or, if we're at a party and the roast beef or the chicken runs out, well, you go down to Overweighty and get something that's already cooked, and Overweighty, save on, and away you go. Everything continues on. But not so in this culture. When a little girl was born, the father would begin to put wine away for her wedding. And so every year with the grape harvest, he would set aside a certain amount of wine for the wedding that was to come. And it was just a part of the ritual. It was a part of what Dad did. It was the part of the hope chest, was the gathering of this wine. It was the father of the bride's responsibility. And so if he wasn't able to store up enough wine because he didn't have the grapes or the fields, he would have to save money. They didn't have banks back then, so put it in a sock or wear under the mattress or wherever, so that he would have enough money to provide for all the guests that would be coming to celebrate with him and his wife and his daughter as she got married. And so culturally, this event was humongous. And it was very devastating and a disgrace to run out of wine. Not only would Dad never live it down, but the couple, being in this small town, would never live that down. They would always be the couple that the wine ran out at their wedding. And they would have egg on their face for the rest of their lives. Now, why did they run out of wine? Was it because Jesus and his half a dozen burly fishermen friends all of a sudden showed up at this party? I mean, those guys probably knew how to party. Was that why they ran out of wine? I don't know. But you know what? There's no way that Jesus was going to be responsible for bringing shame and disgrace on this family. Not for simply showing up at a party. So what happens? There's this apparent disaster. And then in verse 4, there's this apparent rebuke. Jesus says to his mother, "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" I think in